Welcome to the Talking Serverless podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Jones, joined today by Vadym Kazulkin. Vadym Kazulkin is a head of development at ip.labs, 100% subsidiary of the FUJIFILM Group, based in Bonn, Germany. ip.labs is the world-leading white label e-commerce software imaging company. Vadym has been involved with the Java ecosystem for over 20 years. His focus and interests currently include the design and implementation of highly scalable and available applications, serverless and AWS Cloud. Vadym is the co-organizer of the Java User Group Bonn Meetup and AWS Community Builder in the serverless category, and a frequent speaker at various meetups and conferences around the world. How are you doing today, Vadym?
Yeah, hi Ryan. Yeah, I'm doing well after all these holidays and so on. A bit of tired of firing, so of all the holidays. So now back to work and quite exciting to talk to you now. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I know it was. Yeah, doing good. Yeah, thanks for asking. It's as you said, holiday season, end of year rush. It's about the same for all of us, right? We're all scrambling everywhere, spending time with family, friends, as well as wrapping up items for work. How has that been for you? Was it a crazy end of year? Was it smooth? How did it go?
So it's always the same. We have kind of increased Christmas business because we're in this photo business and the people are just buying their Christmas gifts and so on. So quite a lot to do at work that everything runs smoothly. Then I had 2 weeks vacation. My wife has birthday in between, so a lot of birthday next week. My little son has a birthday 2 weeks later, daughter. So a bit of crazy times currently with all this stuff. But finally it will be over and I will have some pause from all that stuff. So currently, yeah, it's always new year. Yes, new plans at work. So roadmaps, all that stuff is going on currently. But it's quite usual stuff for me since years.
Oh wow, yeah, no, that's a lot. So hopefully you're able to still get in, some time to focus on, more deep work sort of stuff during this period. But I know that when it's birthday season and holiday season intertwined, it's a lot of fun. So, well, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast for the listeners. As I mentioned, you've been in the Java ecosystem for a long time. I think Java and serverless is sometimes thought about as sort of an afterthought. However, a lot of the ecosystem outside of serverless is Java based, right? So bridging these communities together and helping build a future where serverless and Java makes sense. I think that's like the meat of where I think our audience is going to get the most value. So I guess from your perspective, how is your career, how did it start in Java? How did it grow? How did you get into serverless and AWS? And what does that currently look like for you?
Oh, so yeah, I had the passion for Java and I started even in the last century, which probably reveals how old I am. Yeah, 43 currently. Yeah, it was my huge passion and I developed a lot probably until several years back. And our company did a lot of backend in Java. And I'm currently working at ip.labs for more than 16 years. So that's just quite a huge track, probably even unusual. And we were quite successful with the Java backend and Spring and so on. But but we have this teeny thing, the Christmas season, where we had this, and we were completely in the data centers. We had 2 data centers for different types of customers. We had the classical system administration department, probably as many had. But yeah, this Christmas season where we had peaks for more than 10x comparing to normal stuff because people are buying their gifts, photo book of the year, calendars, all that stuff. There are a lot of promotions going on. And yeah, sometimes it happens that you will be victim of your own success. So we had then a lot of customers, but sometimes also scaling issues. And we tried to solve that in the data center, but it was kind of, we had success, but we saw that just to have the persistent success, we have to change something. And what was, I think, 2017, earlier 2017, where we started to look at how just to become better at scaling, and AWS was obvious. But I'm based in Germany, Europe, and cloud in Europe was in the early stage. It was obvious probably in the US that people did it from 2011 or something like this, like Netflix and so on. But we had here data center in Ireland, data center in Frankfurt, and that's it. We didn't have too much experience here in the region, but nevertheless, we started as a company looking into ways how to migrate workloads just to see the value. And of course, we started more or less like lift and shift. Yeah, just more or less to use the scaling responsibility of the cloud provider. And just it took us years, 4 or more years, just to migrate everything. And on the way, we have refactored the parts of the application that need scaling. And but I think that the most interesting event in the company occurred I think it was the beginning of 2018. And we had kind of in the beginning of the January, like 3 weeks there, we developers were allowed to work at something that was important to the company, but we could choose. And we wanted just to rewrite some tool that was a bunch of scripts, but it was so important for the financial existence of the company. So we wanted to make the application of this and just make it secure and so on. But the thing was that this tool only need to run on the first of each month. But then for many customers, scaling, but only just for several hours. And then during the months on demand. So project manager can just look into the data in between. And that was kind of the discussion how we do this. Yeah, we started with, just do it with Spring. Okay, let's Dockerize, let's use containers. But then we ask ourselves, how much time in percentage in the month should this tool run? And we came on something like less than 1%. So we were currently doing first steps with AWS, and we read something about serverless, but we didn't have any experience. But this was something pay as you go and just scale on demand. And it was just this property. It should scale for 2 hours heavily, but then we didn't use it more or less. And it was just, let's try the stuff. And of course, it was kind of, we took Lambda, we took API Gateway, DynamoDB, SQS, email service. And it were exciting 3 weeks, but we saw the benefit of the technology, how easy it was to do this for that steps, and how easily for us it was to run this, not to worry about all this infrastructural stuff and all the metrics were there. Of course, we were quite naive in that time and didn't do a lot of stuff, but it was kind of starting point to us to see, okay, we can do stuff differently. Yeah, we can offload some stuff to AWS and it provides value. So the upcoming projects were kind of serverless first mindset. So we try to solve this on the serverless way to see, can we achieve this? And if it's not, okay, can we take Fargate, like manage containers? And if that's for some kind of reason, which is kind of seldom not the case, then we can talk about Dockerization, probably even EC2. And now we're having kind of this mixed infrastructure. We have classical one, even EC2s. We have Dockerized, but we have a lot of serverless services. And for the new stuff, we are kind of looking into the ways how to proceed with that. And that was for me also the point where I dug deep into serverless and then talk about our experiences and so on in the conferences, see a lot of value, but also I see that the adoption is a bit of, I would like to see more adoption. There are always the same companies, like your company, talking about this, but I don't see that the community is quite huge. As I started 4 years ago, I expected more, to be honest. Probably there are reasons for that, but I think that the people who are doing this, they see a lot of value. They can tweak that everything right, but it requires huge expertise and mindset shift to be successful. But currently happy with that. That also meant that the first workloads that we did with serverless were kind of not written in Java. for that obvious reasons, like cold start, memory, and it's of course an invoice. So we had to relearn a lot of developers with that, where savvy Java developers became savvy JavaScript developers. Because there were no real solution for that Java problems within serverless world. And that's why I also became part of the community, just because I know how huge this community is, Java community, just how to embrace this world to serverless, that the adoption may become bigger, because it's a huge stake that AWS were leaving, not embracing Java community. probably it was long or short. I don't know if you have precise questions, but this kind of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
track over the last more than 20 years. Currently, I'm head of development, but anyway, I'm just in my heart, I'm techie. I just would like to talk to people that, and understand their problems and how cloud may help them to solve them. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a ton of great stuff there, so I'm sure the listeners are already getting a lot out of it. So thank you for giving a full breakdown of, how it started, how y'all approached the problem of moving away from data centers. It sounds like, if I repeated it back, it was a tiered approach. You did kind of a multi-layered. You did a lift and shift. You have EC2 instances still, some Dockerized things, and you have purely Lambda things running as well. With more of those serverless supporting services on AWS. I guess like the first question would be how, I mean, you already kind of said like it was difficult to start. Some Java developers became JavaScript developers, and there was issues, which I feel like I've heard that there's been improvements on the serverless side with Java. I guess how true is that? Has it improved on the cold start side and the support from AWS, or is there still a lot of room to go?
So back 4 years ago, there were no real solutions for the cold start. And of course, it's not the problem of each application. If you have asynchronous workloads, then it's not a huge problem. But if you have public facing application, and if you experience this cold starts, especially if you're using DynamoDB, and DynamoDB uses a HTTP client, and it just all that stuff in Java was more for the serverless world, and you could have 6, 7, 8 seconds of the cold start. And now I see even that the containers will be released much more often. So you see fresh containers even each 7, 8 minutes. So some portion of your users will have such 7, 8 seconds cold starts, and even probably more depending on the business logic that you are doing. And it was really a problem. And that's why probably many people stayed away from using Java. But then the next step was this ahead of time compiler in GraalVM that GraalVM added this step that you can do native images, and these native images only include what that will be used more or less. And of course, that also reduced the cold start because it's kind of already compiled into the native world. So all these Java just-in-time compilers were left out, and they only used small amount of memory. The situation was that you need custom runtime to run it. Yeah, there is no managed GraalVM. I asked about, is that something years ago or something behind the Java that can switch between classic Java and for some hottest functions just to convert it to GraalVM, but it's not without. So ahead of time compilation, you need to be sure that you have everything there. And if you use something like reflection and load something, that may break your application in runtime, which is kind of also a bad experience. But yeah, you have this custom runtime, and custom runtime at AWS requires also that you build this. So you have CI/CD for building this, for scaling this. There are just, you are in this bit of management world, how to do this. And the situation is, depending on your workloads, building GraalVM native image takes minutes. Yeah, depending on how many dependencies you have, just converting this, and it breaks kind of a bit of developer experience because sometimes you change only teeny function, but you need to rebuild the whole image. And this is something that needs to be considered. It improves over time. It's always the technology improves and it becomes shorter. But this GraalVM is not without challenges, because in Java world, you rely too much on open source, and this all dependencies needs to be kind of GraalVM aware that there is no dynamic loading, reflection, all that stuff. And it takes also time. So there is a list of libraries that are kind of GraalVM free that you can use, but it's not everything. AWS SDK, Java SDK have been changed, that they are kind of free or safe to use for the GraalVM. But for many people, this ahead of time compilation, all that risk, all that stuff, I had the discussions that the many didn't feel comfortable going this way with all that GraalVM stuff. I used it. It was okay for smaller applications. Sometimes I run into some issues with the bigger ones, but I see that the people, they want to use this pure Java stuff. And then I was aware of this project coordinated check starts this crack project on Java. And I was quite excited and a bit of even surprised that AWS released during the reinvent this snap start, which is kind of mixed situation. This is how to quickly save and restore a Firecracker VM with the whole VM, but also the situation is with the cold start or with Java application that every time you just initialize everything, there your code, so your application, what from the memory states looks the same. So after each cold start, and then this idea is to save this state, to persist it, and then even to load it. And it is just quicker as just to load all the classes. This is kind of this idea behind there, this snap start, which is based on this open source project crack. And this crack is based on Creo. This is kind of Linux stuff, how you can save and restore on the operational system level. Quite exciting. I heard about 6 papers, all this stuff, how this works. And I had this possibility now to test this snap start, how it improves, because from the idea you have some limitations, because you are not allowed to use everything, but generally it works. But mainly it's just on the Lambda level, you check that you use snap start. So generally you don't need to change the code if you are aware of limitations, and they are fine. And I was really surprised that the cold starts that I have now with DynamoDBs and so on have been reduced to, depending on techniques, what you use, but you can achieve something like half of the second. And this is completely comparable to Python, to JavaScript and friends like Node.js, like TypeScript. And I think it will now open more doors. We need to explore more. I just wrote the blogs how to use pure Java function with snap start, but also there are frameworks which help you to be productive. Micronaut Quark is probably out of the scope, or we can talk about this, but you can bring this cold start below 1 second, but you need to use some kind of techniques like priming, which is very important. With priming, you can do before this VM or will be secured, you can do additional calls like to the DynamoDB table that you use with kind of give me the item with ID 0. You don't need to have this item, but with that, through the Java classes will be loaded, and there are something serializer, deserializer, they all will be initialized and then stored within this package. And then if this package will be then loaded, it's much, much quicker. So you need to follow some best practices. But the first impression of this, and I also hear this from the community, that if you have cold start something between half of the second and the second, it doesn't hurt too much. So I think we need to explore more, because it's a young technology, but it's also even this can be improved any further. And I think that we will come much closer to what we require, that we don't have that cold starts for the public facing application. So the first impression is really good. So currently testing further and talking to the community. Mark Sales is from AWS doing a great job. And we have a lot of people in the community, Java community, pushing AWS even further to improve the stuff. But it was nice to be heard, because I used a lot of AWS wish list and not too much happened. But now I see that they are hearing to the community, and it becomes better and better.
Yeah, this was a really cool. This was a really cool release, the Snapstart. And while you were talking, I opened up another tab just to refresh myself. The stated 10x reduced cold start time for Java runtime, and it's really cool to seeing that notification come through on the RSS feeds around the announcement, and then going, okay, well, we don't do, at least the serverless crew, we're not working actively with Java and serverless. So to hear from your perspective that I was aware of the 6 to 7 second cold starts that were happening back in 2018, because I was working at Nike at the time. And while I was there, we were doing some Java stuff, and we were trying to load that in to a Lambda. And I was trying to see, okay, if we can make this work, because I was familiar with the Node.js side, and there's a lot of stuff happening Java-wise at Nike, then maybe there's some opportunity to optimize a bunch of stuff. But with the cold start times and everything else, it was sort of X'd pretty quickly on. So hearing the fact that you did know the 6 to 7 second cold start time, now you're saying it's down underneath a second. That's pretty amazing. I guess, like, and from your perspective, how many people know about that in like tangible terms like that? I mean, obviously, reInvent was only like a month ago, so. But yeah, do you think that this is now going to start growing quite rapidly throughout this year, or what is your thoughts?
So I think, yes, it will now happen that the people will adopt serverless more in the Java world. Of course, you need to be aware of the limitation. For example, this technology, there is cloud formation and even SAM support for this. It's quite rare in the AWS world that they release the feature with that. So I was quite surprised. But there are some kind of limitations. You don't have X-ray support. Currently, if you enable snap start, it's kind of tricky stuff. Many people will not feel comfortable going without observability. Of course, X-ray has its other disadvantages. It's also, but anyway, it will be nice that it will be added. And of course, there is another stuff you should use. You cannot use the latest Lambda. So you need to use the specific version of the Lambda function, which is then kind of has the alias on API gateway and something like this. That's kind of what that you need to adopt all your cloud formation, or what you use SAM SDK packages. And still, I just tested. It requires so because now the first deployment of the function. So each time you change the code and deploy them, it takes more time because of this snapshot and checkpoint. It should be taken, it should be stored. And even I see in the logs that several attempts to snapshot the function is taken. Sometimes I see one, sometimes I see two, sometimes I see five. I didn't find out why this happens. But my first test have been for the application that I tested, that the deployment of the function, I did this with SAM, takes additional, so kind of 2 minutes. If I have more Lambda functions, they will be deployed in parallel. So it's not the factor if I have a lot of functions, each takes 2 or 3 minutes, but the additional time to deploy is 2 or 3 minutes. I also wanted to talk if I am doing something wrong, or it's kind of, yeah, it's the time just to take the snapshot to store it or something like this. The same we had with GraalVM. Yeah, to build the native image, it also took time. So I think even with that, there are a lot of opportunities to improve, because as developer experience, I do some small change. I need to wait several minutes just in order to test it. I don't know if there will be some local support for this. So there is, it's always the new technology. There are some downsides. Things will be improved. But I think the good thing is that the people now have choice. Yeah. So if the cold start is not an issue, they can use Java. If they say, okay, with GraalVM, they can reduce it even a bit more without some kind of other trade-offs. Now they have AWS SAM, which is also kind of very easy. Generally don't need to change the code, or you do priming, like doing this DynamoDB call with ID just to warm up additionally. Depends on the workload, what would bring you. But I think that adoption will currently increase. That's really my belief. But you need now to transport that knowledge, that more people try the stuff for different kind of workloads, then reflect back what's working, and just let AWS also improve the stuff. But generally, yes, I think it's just another alternative, which is very, very valid alternative currently. Yeah, I'm really optimistic. But of course, everything is a trade-off. People should be aware, read through all these pages, what is the stuff, and so on. Something like what I find out, but it was in the end was documented that in the credential chain, you cannot use environment credential anymore, because they don't want to store your credentials within this snapshot. So you should use default or the container handler for this credentials and so on. But this is quite understandable. So there are maybe smaller changes that you need to do in the code, but everything is documented fairly. Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, that's the biggest question I would have for this, because I thank you so much for kind of going through the limitations there, because obviously no X-ray, some additional Lambda version alias stuff on the API gateway side, the deployment times being slower, local testing not fully being there to replicate that process. Those are sort of things that, as a developer, if I was a Java developer evaluating this, I go, okay, cold starts are better, but there's still these other areas. And you mentioned there are ways to sort of work around some of these. And I guess when it comes to how you put all those pieces together with it, if I'm saying it right, Grovel VM, as well as using SnapStart and doing the alias setup with API Gateway, is there like a documented template that you have, or a blog like guide where if I was starting today and I was going, okay, I want to implement exactly what Vadym has done with Java and serverless, is there a comprehensive sort of guide like that exists?
So probably not, or is people are currently blogging about this. So I released 4 days ago a blog how just to use Spring Boot with SnapStart, so Java with Spring Boot framework, which is one of the most popular. In the previous versions of this article, I just showed how to use Micronaut and Quarkus and pure Lambda, and I just I have my GitHub repository, so I can share the link how I do this stuff. There is no magic. I mean, adding like version and alias to API gateway in the same template is one row, more or less. But you should be aware, because if you don't do this, then even activate SnapStart, the usual Java function will be called without SnapStart. You can see this in the log, because you see that there is no you see different kind of logging. If you have SnapStart, for example, you see the restore phase. There is a checkpoint and something is saved, but then you see in the log in the init phase that this restore is happening, and then you know that the SnapStart is activated. And for example, then you have different CloudWatch queries to figure out your cold start. So in case you're using SnapStart, there is kind of other queries. But this, if you know this, is just the same query each time that calculates the stuff and so on. I documented this on my personal blog. There are lots of people currently blogging about the same, and we are currently in exchange how just to completely use that stuff and so on. So I can share the link. You can look into the stuff, try it out. It's just GitHub. So simply check out and then same deploy, more or less, and then look how it works for you. Yeah, that's currently the stuff.
Okay, yeah, no, that's very helpful. We'll make sure to include the link to that blog post in the show notes. So anybody listening interested in that, definitely check the show notes there. And then when it comes to the comprehensive guide side, I think it's good to reflag, like you did, that SnapStart is not automatically enabled, and that, you know, I gotta imagine that people believe that they're deploying using SnapStart if there's a checkbox they have to enable, and then going, hey, what the heck, you know, I'm still getting the same sort of cold starts I got before, and so that's really interesting. On the Java Spring Boot side, that's a very cool setup in general, because obviously, as you said, it's the most popular Java framework there. What was the difficulty in figuring out how to put those things together to use Java Spring Boot, with SnapStart enabled?
So generally, it was interesting because Spring Boot was the most popular framework, but they use heavily reflection, all that stuff that contributes additionally to the cold start. So the cold starts using Spring Boot were awful, so that the people probably, I don't know if it's cold start doesn't matter. You probably can use this, but otherwise, it was difficult. They released Spring Native project this fall, so three months ago. This was to support GraalVM there, just native image stuff. They had of course the most difficult job, just to refactor Spring Basic, just not to use reflection to enable this for native stuff. So other frameworks like Quarkus, like Micronaut, they were developed for microservices serverless world from the beginning. So they used a lot of stuff in the compilation time. Of course, it's another trade-off. Now the compile time takes longer, then you have less cold start. So everything is kind of this trade-off. But the Spring Boot guys had just a lot of work to do for the Graal VM, and now this snap start was enabled, and now I just tested with Spring Boot, and it has been, it's just they had the slowest cold starts comparing to other frameworks, but it's less than 1 second. And that is something where I would say, okay, 200 milliseconds more for the cold start, but the people are familiar with the programming model of the Spring. It's probably still a good trade-off, even if other frameworks even support some kind of Spring Boot style. But the people, if they are familiar and productive with one framework, they say, okay, I will pay a bit more for, this cold start doesn't hurt me too much, to some additional 100 milliseconds, then I'm really productive. I don't need to learn something new. So I think even for them, it will be possible. But generally, it was not very difficult to enable this for the Spring, because even AWS people, they maintain the project which kind of proxy the request between Lambda and Spring Boot controller, kind of receiver of the web method. So everything was documented even previously to snap start, and I just tried to enable the snap start and tested how it works. So it was kind of a very smooth experience. But I can say once again, priming, this kind of additional call to warm up your services, especially HTTP based AWS services, is essential. Otherwise you can have still cold starts. So without priming, I had the cold start about a bit below 2 seconds for Spring application, and it's a bit too much with priming. I'm now at 600 milliseconds in P50, so I think that's a good starting point.
Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, that's really important stuff. I think the priming part, I want to say that in Node.js, there's an environment variable that you set to help with the HTTP warmup, and same thing with Python. I think Python, maybe it's already baked into it. I could be wrong on that. So maybe that's something that AWS is already planning to do with Java, is to help on that. I guess when you say the HTTP calls, is that the one that you said earlier sounded like a query that you made to kind of warm that call up? Are there other services that basically rely on the exact same thing? So if you're making a request to SES or SQS, it's the same sort of warm-up calls that you have to make? Or how have you seen that obstacle as you've been working with this?
So I didn't try snap start. It will be probably part of my the next series of my article to test also SQS and SNS. So I think that I'm not quite sure that I will have the such a bigger cold starts as with DynamoDB, because I don't think that SQS and SNS rely on HTTP client. I have to check, but this HTTP client which Java provides, they are kind of a long-living application, and they are not very suitable for the Lambda world. They are simply recycle the stuff. You don't want to cache it. It costs you memory and so on. This is one problem. The second problem is this translation layer between your programming model and JSON. And this, many people call this serializer, deserializer. Some people call them marshaller, unmarshaller. But this logic, which is automatically in Java, you have the person class and then you have person JSON. And this stuff needs to be converted back and forth because it becomes JSON. Then the application is the person object. And then in the database, DynamoDB JSON again. And this stuff, to convert this back and forth, it also relies on something which needs to be loaded one time and costs you probably 1 second. That's perfectly fine trade-off for the server world, where you're doing something and your application is up for, I don't know if you're scaling, it may be shorter, but it even may be for weeks, depending how often you deploy. But for the Lambda world, if you recycle this container, this 1 second additionally for 7 minutes, that was something that added up. I don't think that you have this overhead for SQS and SNS mostly. So I will test this, because measure before you say something, but I'm quite confident that the cold starts using these services will be kind of lower. but I would like to confirm it as well. So I even think that the priming will not have such a huge effect on this, because there's some additional clients that will be, some additional classes that will be loaded. It should be quick. But this also thinks that the problem is that you need to understand these mechanics, that for the DynamoDB, this marshaller, unmarshaller, one-time initialization, this is kind of the details behind the scenes. This is something that we probably need to be knowledgeable, where it makes sense, where it doesn't make sense, and so on. Sometimes you want to use the service and don't think about these details, how this is loaded, it's one time, is it cached or not, it should be quick. Yeah, but Java world is kind of this long living services. It was for decades, for last 2 decades, it was the same, more or less. And now this microservices, rapid scaling, then the instances go away and so on. It just changes everything, how you develop these applications. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like one last question on the priming part. When it comes to the container side, if you make that initial call, does it stay active for the entire container? So all the future requests that are invoking Lambda functions, they don't need to keep making that query? Or is it every single time a Lambda gets invoked, it needs to make that call out to DynamoDB just to get back the properties to help with all the deserialization and serialization?
So generally how it works, at least with Crack, you can implement additional resource interface, which comes with this Crack project. So you need to add this dependency once again. And then you have 2 methods, like before checkpoint and after restore. And before checkpoint will be executed if you deploy the function for the first time, kind of, or if you're changing something and deploying this, and there you do this call. And then you warm up everything, and all the state of loaded classes and memory state will be then saved. And after restore, you usually don't do anything, because then what I stored needs to be restored. More or less, I currently don't have a use case that after restore, and after the restore will be in the call start phase, I need to do something. So for me, it's important just to that the state of the application is loaded with as much as possible is there that I need then for the execution time. You need time and then warm execution. So this before checkpoint allows me just to do additional stuff, to load some classes, to make, people call this make fake calls, more or less, just to warm up, to load the stuff that you will need later. But of course, the trade-off is it costs more deployment time for the first time. It maybe doesn't hurt you for the application. Okay, you can wait a bit more before it's live, kind of, and then, yeah, then everything will be just simply restored and executed quickly. Yeah, that's kind of the trade-off where you do this stuff. And yeah, I don't have the use case what you will do after the checkout. Probably you can test something. So if the people rely on something temporary, they probably can check if it's there, but it's generally a very bad practice to just open some temporary files and then the state will be safe, because then Lambda will be run on another container and then the file is not there. So that's generally not what you should do. You should do something that is common for all your calls. Yeah, just to save the time. And if it's something individual, depending on the request and the API gateway, then you should not save that. Yeah, that's dynamical part of the application. So at least how I understand and see how to deal with that on the most pragmatic way or fruitful way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I definitely have done the save it as a temporary file on the container and then check to see, is it already loaded or not? Part of that was trying to run a machine learning workload where I had a model file and we were doing computer inference, and then I was loading the model file on. It would create like a 5-minute cold start on the initial, or like a 4-minute cold start right underneath the limit back when the max Lambda time was 5 minutes. And then all the future requests would be like around a second or faster. And so when we were doing development and testing of the model for computer inference, it was actually a pretty cheap way to do it. And, kind of hacky, but it's nice to hear that there's better practices, better practices now than something like that. And then you mentioned one thing around the mindset shift, and I think that that's really important. So how has that gone for y'all, and what were the biggest hurdles that you had to kind of go through as you started sort of changing the minds, not only of yourself, but also the rest of the team about how to make Java and serverless kind of interact and work towards more of this like microservice, system?
So generally, we are still using less Java with the serverless world. So we have some smaller applications with Java. So the most difficult part was, in general, shifting the mindset. Why to use serverless in general? It doesn't matter what programming language you are using versus container and all other stuff. Because many people are coming from this classical world where we measure CPU, we measure RAM, disk usage, and if you are looking what we are measuring within the Lambda world, is just errors, retries, all that stuff, just timeouts. It's totally different how you think about your application. What is important, what is taking, what is AWS is taking care for you. So it was kind of difficult, but of course we have this misunderstanding. So we thought that the Lambda you can scale indefinitely, which is not the case. You have these limits, how account region limits, and then these are soft limits, but you have harder limits. So all dealing with limits, it's just, I think that the half of our company is spending the time reading all these limitation pages for each AWS service currently, because it's very important to understand. But generally, of course, it's just this micro world has its challenges. So you need to think even more about a good design, probably domain-driven design, something, how you organize the stuff, what is behind the public API, what is behind the internal API, because normally you will end up having many functions. And then you need to think how to structure them. You need to think about observability, just how to find out what's not going right. And you have to do it quickly, because if you have then a lot of chain calls and all that stuff, and then something's broken, you need to identify this. Observability is kind of, I think it's even challenging stuff, not from the technical perspective, but also from the cost perspective, looking in how much all this CloudWatch stuff at scale costs, or all these third-party providers that are doing a great job, but it becomes pricey. But it's more how just to generate value. I think serverless is just doing things at speed, just doing more business logic and so on. That's kind of value. You will end up probably, in many cases, it will be more expensive with serverless. People think it's differently, but especially observability part, and if you have a lot of API gateway requests, it will become costly at scale. It doesn't even matter if you use HTTP API, it will become costly. So all that stuff, X-ray is costly, probably the state changes and the step functions and so on. But generally, you can iterate much quicker. And I think that the speed is kind of the most factor. And of course, leaving the maintenance out of it is a huge stuff. With Java, what we are doing, we're maintaining Tomcat as a web application server. I don't have this if I have API gateway and Lambda. And just the people that maintain or just upgrade the versions or migrate to the newest version, the newest standards, things are not working. And with DynamoDB, mostly things are backwards compatible. You don't need to upgrade the stuff like you are doing for Postgres, MariaDB, and so I think that's freeing your time for something that is more important. But I think that will not work in the cost center kind of organizations that are more like saving on maintenance, saving on costs. I think that they will struggle adopting the stuff, and that will collide probably completely. But the organizations that are looking to become productive at speed and iterate, throw things out, changing the stuff, cost of change in the applications. If you design it right, it will be, I think, much less with serverless. That's kind of what the expectation is. But you can over-engineer easily. So I see that people have people in the team and 500 Lambda functions, it can become a bit difficult. So probably not starting with two small services may, even if it may sound as an anti-pattern, I think that it should work on the smaller scale with smaller functions. Then you can probably decouple more and make it work for much more complex scenarios, because I saw a lot of microservices adoption that the people could not understand what's going on live. Yeah, and that's also probably not very good stuff. But you are probably having a lot of experiences doing lots of projects where all this stuff is. But a lot of knowledge is required. You need to be very profound in AWS and all that stuff. And nothing is for free. Probably, I think this knowledge is one of the things that the serverless adoption is kind of not how I expected this, because the standard stuff, EC2 or even container, is something more natural. At least now for the generation of developers there, and not every company can invest in knowledge. Many startups have junior developers, because they cannot afford paying more experienced staff. Depends on the situation. But the mindset shift, we are also having teams that are doing this, and we're having teams that say we are more confident doing the standard stuff. We are more productive in this, and they are looking into others and trying to adopt the stuff, but it also takes time depending on previous experiences. It's very difficult to erase. 20 years and so doing the stuff differently. But I think it's the way to look how you can do it completely different, because somebody will disrupt you probably with other technology and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be the biggest follow up there, is that, there's the knowledge side of serverless. So there's knowledge required, there's changes in mindset, there's additional setup, likely there's additional cost. So when it comes to why to go serverless, how would you describe that sort of value proposition for, they're already doing stuff today. There's this sort of like new emerging way of leveraging fully managed services to kind of take some stuff off your plate. How would you kind of describe like why somebody should go serverless?
So I think you should look into so of course, being quick and being able to release and have all that stuff that you can release smaller parts independently, it's one thing. But what I advise people or the companies to see, are you doing security? Are you doing patching? Are you doing these versions that is just to upgrade? Are you doing security scans? And do you react on this, or do you tolerate the risk? If you tolerate the risk, then probably the serverless will not be something fine. But if you will really do all that stuff that is required for maintenance application, regularly upgrading all the stuff, then track the time which is required. And the time is huge. A lot of breaking changes, especially in JavaScript world and so on. But then look into the proposition. They have all this managed stuff, managed database, managed API gateway, managed Lambda, managed queue, and so on. So many people tell me, I have this with Kubernetes and Cloud Native Foundation. I can apply a Kubernetes template and I have the queue. You can apply it, but you have to run it. If it doesn't work, it's your problem. Applying it just, it's there, but there is huge operational stuff in this. If everything is working, it's not the problem. But if it's not working, you need people just to repair this and restore and all this stuff. And this ecosystem in AWS with all these backups enabled and all these services that you can kind of glue together, it just gives you a lot of possibility. I'm not quite sure that you can easily change architectures like Lambda to App Runner to Fargate. It all takes time, I think, to refactor it in that way. But nevertheless, I think that that they free your time providing you management and providing you the scaling. I forgot scaling sometimes. Yeah, sometimes you don't need a higher scale, and even the relational database will be enough for you. But sometimes it's just you have to think how I can scale all these read nodes and so on in the database, and just you don't have this with DynamoDB and so on. So think about that stuff. But of course, think what's your pain point. It is maintainability, it's scalability, it's going to market, or just you have COBOL application and you are in a totally different world because nobody understands this and so on. So sometimes it's very difficult to refactor to serverless. Yeah, you can start from some point doing this stuff. That's kind of, so don't try to refactor. Become familiar with all that services. Start small, as we started with that internal tool. If it just doesn't work, somebody will come and fix it on the next working day. But with that, we became kind of confident what are the value proposition of the services and so on. And then you can figure it out. And I see that AWS releases more and more. We have a lot of in the step functions world. We have a lot of in the event bridge. It's probably one of the most important services, or became after 3 or 4 years and so on. So AWS also improves the stuff. Yeah, but of course you have to be aware of login and say that's fine for me. I want to have this login. Because I want to benefit from that stuff. Sometimes there are lots of discussion about login, which I don't understand, because nobody is doing multi-cloud, but everybody wants to have the application which is capable of this. I don't understand why you want to pay for this. Just that it's kind of over-engineering. But there are companies that I don't know, they want to protect themselves, or they think they can. But with all IAM storages, they are locked in anyway in AWS to some extent, at least. But yeah, so from the maintenance part, it's very important, all this managed stuff, but also from the speed and go to market perspective. It may be not the challenge for each company, but it may become in the future. So I hope
this is a great. Yeah, great answer. I love it. I think you really described it well. It frees up your time of a lot of stuff that can cause headaches. And I think the K8 example of Kubernetes about, hey, I can apply this in a minute, a couple minutes, and I've got a queue running, and then that's a great response there of like, yeah, but now you have to maintain it, and you have to continue to own it completely. And it's on you and your customer. You're probably not providing a queue service to your customers, so they don't care at the end of the day, whether it's you doing it or whether it's somebody else doing it. I guess in that way, there's sort of that, when we think about costs, a lot of time there's that calculation, which is maybe more the traditional calculation around servers and so on, where you're like, okay, I've got this much for a rack on a server on a rack inside of a data center. It costs me this much per month. And you can kind of do that breakdown very easily. But what is maybe less looked at is, like you were saying, the time that it takes for you to do maintenance, if there's breaking changes, how you're approaching those, how you're handling, if you have your own, managed way of doing something similar to API gateway, how you expand that outward, how you make it like backwards compatible, etc. And all those things cost a lot of money. And what I've noticed on my end is that engineers are actually probably the biggest cost center. Engineers, DevOps, having people looking at these things. And so if you can spend more time on that end product that you're trying to actually build, less time on other stuff, and you do that full calculation, which is also hard to do, then it can work out that, serverless is much more attractive, in that way.
Yeah, many people think that you don't need to think about operability. Yeah, you have to be a good software engineer anyway. Yeah, serverless doesn't free you. You have to be even more. But I think that the developers become better if they understand more operational stuff. If they look into that metrics and understand and refactor, they even look into the cost, and the cost is kind of feature. You can trade performance, can improve performance. So the next task I can decrease cost because I can do this naturally. It's just without any risk. It's just improvement in the code. I think, of course, you can overload the teams, because now this tendency that developers, they should understand security, they should understand operability, they should understand cost. And of course, it's much more, because 10 years ago, developers only wrote the code and threw it through the wall, and somebody maintained this. The developers didn't understand hardware and characteristics. And I think with that, services that posting their limits, the developers understand what they can achieve and where is the kind of limit of this service, and they need to architect. They should understand the difference between SQS, SNS, Kinesis, event bridge. Yeah, you can go so far, and what is needed for your next step, but nobody is designing application forever. But I think it's also the huge possibility for developers just to obtain the knowledge, but you probably need to manage this within the team, because nobody, at least it's difficult that everybody does everything. Yeah, there is, of course, DevOps. Everybody should do infrastructure as a code. Everybody should release in production and so on. But you should manage this knowledge, because not everybody can be expert in everything. That should be managed within the team, that you have just kind of 2 or 3 people understanding many different aspects, but the team as a whole is an expert. And of course, we have a lot of challenges around the classical system administrators, because many of them don't see any challenge with the serverless at all. Yeah, it's not, yeah, where can I install agents? Oh, I don't have any servers. Or what I'm doing here. That's a probably difficult part, and probably this is one of the parts which prevents organization to moving there, because they have a lot of people trained traditionally. It's not their fault. It's how we worked, everybody. It was valid for 30 years, more or less, and now developers can deploy to production, and yeah, it's kind of disruption which happens. I see that AWS disrupts the markets, but developers should also do more. And I think that was kind of different and also difficult and also painful at our organization, that the system administrators didn't feel comfortable with all the cloud stuff. Depending on the staff, there is still security stuff to do and a lot of educational stuff, but it's different. But I think it's about the speed. Yeah, so if you have the skills in the team that they're capable of releasing everything alone, that's a huge capability. Not coordinating something, not with somebody, and not purchasing some hardware. Okay, we are probably years away from this, but it just was the time, just 8 weeks for the rack, and now 30 seconds and you have the instance. Or Lambda scales automatically until some limit. So it's kind of a lot of shifts. So Simon Wardley talked about all that stuff, how just that became generic everything. And I think it will be continuing, that all these abstraction levels will be raised and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting stuff around, you had 2 points there. I think the first one, I have a story myself of going to, being a consultant and preaching serverless, and then going into organizations and trying to help them implement serverless. It can be jarring. That's definitely true. The experience I had, and I gave a tech talk in Portland at the New Relic office in like 2018 or something. Yeah, around there. And I was introduced it was a DevOps meetup, and I was introduced to here's Ryan Jones. He's going to be speaking about serverless, and hopefully not how it's going to kill all of our jobs. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I had, my talk was just about the benefits of serverless and all this stuff, but I wasn't really fully thinking about how it would be perceived by the people that are there. And I think there's always sort of that friction. I think, the thing that I've learned is that you can never stop learning. So it's one of those things where I think it's the consequence of the sort of industry that we're in, is that if you kind of aren't constantly growing your skill set and knowledge and how the industry is shifting, it's like things just keep moving at rapid speed, and people are iterating on frameworks, iterating on CI/CD, iterating on fully managed services and how all these things connect, and trying to make them faster and so on. And it can be tough. And that initial wave of, hey, what does my job turn into? I think you said it pretty well a second ago, which is, understanding the operations and the under layer of how everything actually operates even when you're working in serverless, it's still extremely useful, and it's very helpful. So the same way now, developers are having to learn a little bit more of the operations, infrastructure, DevOps side. In that same way, there's opportunity for someone that has the operations, DevOps side to learn more of the development side, and vice versa there. So I think it's, there's room for everybody in a sort of a serverless world. There just may be different starting points that people are coming at the same problem with. And so that's kind of one point. And then the last one around organizing teams. That's an interesting one, which is in the past, things were much more siloed. So, developers just write application code, they throw it over the wall, some QA person picks it up, tests it, throws it back over the wall, or then passes it to, somebody else to deploy it. And now we have more of, hey, you kind of can do all of it, but maybe you shouldn't. And so that's a complex problem because we want that speed, but we also don't want to sacrifice security and proper logging and all this stuff. And so, question to you, how have y'all handled that? And empowering developers, but then also not giving them the keys to the, keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, so of course, also we are struggling with some points. It's just not all are roses, and of course you have to set standards. What needs to be released, and all this traditional stuff that you are doing, this dependency management, your screening dependencies with tools, comparing this to vulnerability databases. And of course, you need to do the security scans. So all that stuff and all these keys needs to be rotated and all that stuff. And that's security in the cloud. And it's a lot to do. And AWS has millions of services there. It's easy to pick the wrong one. I think sometimes it's too much services. Sometimes you need 2 or 3 that they are doing, I would say 95% instead of you don't know where to start. So of course, it's everything is prioritization more or less. Yeah, you cannot do everything, and just depending on the phase of the project, you have kind of different goals. But of course, from my perspective, observability is important. You need to have alarms before going live. You cannot sacrifice this. You cannot fix this afterwards. You need to think about that, what you are monitoring, what are the right metrics and all this stuff. And I think that the code quality and security, they kind of more or less can be also, they are the traditional world where kind of also there. And AWS helps you with the security of the underneath, so you don't need to worry how Firecracker works and all the stuff. But the security of the application remains the same responsibility as it has been. Yeah, nothing has changed. That's why, that's need to be tackled, needs to be prioritized, and that's the old ways. Just to pay attention to this, because it will kill you. All this stuff, but with serverless, less maintenance, it just frees you time probably for doing more security or something like this of the application, of your application at least. Yeah, so that's kind of a good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's we're just crossing the 1 hour mark. I know we've found that that's sort of a sweet spot to make sure people are still listening before getting distracted with other stuff. So I wanted to thank you again for being on the podcast. And final question to you is, do you have any things coming up that you want to promote? Any talks? Any you have the blog, things like that. Anything that you want to shout out or promote personally?
Oh, thanks for the question. No, I have the small blog. I started as a community builder. I was more the person who did the talks. But now I told myself I need to write more because I can explain the things more. That's why I just kind of combine it. No, I will remain active and apply for COPs, mainly in the serverless world and Java world. Now I'm just exploring services based on AI, like Code Whisperer or GitHub Copilot. Now we have ChatGPT, just another stuff. And I tried this for AWS services, and I was amazed of the quality of what I was recommended. So that's kind of new passion for me, because I currently see the tendencies that the people using AI services will be more productive probably. Nothing will replace experience. I'm quite sure that's difficult, but I think to get the first 80% of the stuff, probably we will see more interactions with the AI world, and this is something I'm currently exploring, and we'll be talking about Code Whisperer. I tried this with Java application, could even write the small application with the help of Code Whisperer, not without limitation, but anyway, this kind of the area where I'm looking for. I talk a lot about DevOps Guru because I also see a lot of value in the microservices world, that you will get all these insights, what's going on automatically without setting alarms, especially for serverless world, because AWS has a lot of experience operating DynamoDBs, API gateways, Lambdas, that they can provide the metrics for you, so they can train what is right, what's not right, and just free you up for writing, for creating alarms for hundreds of your Lambda functions. So I see a lot of value there, and I will try to contribute with my talks. And probably we will see each other in the conferences. We were both on the Serverless Summit this year with I think, lightning talks both. So I think the community is quite small. It's not too small, but the people see each other all the way. So I hope we will meet each other in person someday. Yeah, and
absolutely.
Probably do another podcast about some other topics. So there is a lot of things going on.
Yeah, I think the big one there is we could probably do another hour plus on just the AI stuff happening at the moment. Yeah. I've also been playing with ChatGPT for, because, I think, okay, because, you're talking about Code Whisperer. Okay, there's some stuff there on helping generate code. I was using ChatGPT for what does this job role mean? And what companies out there are using serverless? And can you give me a list of that? And can you give it in the table? And if I was going to build something where I could send emails from Slack, is there a tool on the market that already does that? Okay, there is. Does it allow for email templates so I don't have to write the email out? Well, yes, there's this. And I'm like, okay. And so I could do a full brainstorming session by just talking to ChatGPT. It gave me a lot of bad recommendations as well, stuff that didn't exist. But for the most part, it was really helpful in sort of giving a better experience than trying to Google search something and then going through different tabs, going through a bunch of fluff inside of something, and then finally getting that piece of good information. So yeah, that's I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that as this year progresses, all this new sort of development on the AI side is going to just keep going. And I'm also in the same agreement that if you're working with tools like ChatGPT and so on, you're going to be more productive. Another example of this is I have to write a lot of emails, and there's even ChatGPT. There was an integration someone built on Twitter. They talked about where it can read the context of the email and then write an email response without you really having to think about it. You review it, and then, like you said, you take the 20% that probably you need to customize or add something specific, make that work, and bang, you have a very well-written professional response to maybe a complex situation, and you can spend the majority of your time only on that really specific piece. And that's sort of flipping that 80-20 thing, right? As well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very interesting. So I think people didn't expect ChatGPT. That I know a lot of experts in AI. They say they could not imagine that this happening last year. They thought it can take 10 years. I don't know what people at Google currently think. Even Stack Overflow and so on. So they may be feeling some kind of pressure now to react on this, but this is another story, and it's not my beer. But anyway, of course, everybody should think how I can be more productive, or kind of with newer technologies, what I can sacrifice, how I can balance the stuff, because the stuff is real and it will impact us. Yeah, yeah. So that's I was not the AI person, and it's probably even currently not, but I see a lot of coming, and then of course you should reflect what does it mean, how the job of the developer will look like in 10 years. I have 3 children. My older son is 16 and learns Python. currently, and in 3 years he will start the job. And I also think, hey, how he will develop, because okay, he should understand basics of programming languages, otherwise it will not work. Yeah, and my youngest son is 6, but I think he will see another world of what is doing. That will be something completely different, probably. We even don't know how. Yeah, but they will not work the same way I'm working currently, and that's probably fine.
Yeah, it's definitely very, very trippy. So I think I wasn't the biggest AI person either. And even when ChatGPT came out, I really didn't engage with it for a little bit. And I started to hear other people saying, okay, this is kind of cool. And I told other people, I'm like, you should use it, et cetera. And I started hearing feedback from others that I told to use it. And they're like, oh, this is insane. I have a friend that she runs a clothing company, and her entire website, all the descriptions, everything is all written with ChatGPT. It was basically, she could say, okay, I've got this item, and it's let's say a floral dress, and can you write me a description that's like makes people want to buy it, etc. And then ChatGPT would give something back, and then she'd say, okay, can you make it more fun, and can you make it shorter? And it would rewrite the entire thing to make it more fun and shorter and more capture what she was sort of looking for. And she flushed the entire website out, all the descriptions for tons of items, just by asking ChatGPT these questions. And for someone that doesn't have access to all those different fields of knowledge, it's incredible that you can just access that. And how that now develops from here, I mean, it's going to be, I think you're right, it's going to be a whole new world in a shorter time period than we think. And yeah, as a developer, you can't. It's like a wave. I don't feel that you can fight against it. The only thing that you can do, learn how to use the tools that are out there that make you more productive, and then focus, again, on the stuff that makes the biggest impact. So, what's the part that AI doesn't quite get right, or that needs that specialized domain knowledge, and that's where you can put the majority of your focus. But then if it's generating projects or checking for basic errors and so on, there's certain things like that I think the AI is going to tackle first. So
yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it's another topic probably for another 2 hours.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, that's a taste, and then maybe we'll have you back, and then we can dive into it in a year and say, hey, look, this is how 2023 turned out. But with that, I want to thank you again, Vadym, for being a guest on the Talking Serverless podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for inviting me. I hope you enjoyed, and I will provide the links to the blogs and to my GitHub account, so you can check out this AWS Snapstart and playing around with it. Thanks once again.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you. To those listening, this has been the Talking Serverless podcast with Ryan Jones. If you like our show and want to check out more, please look at Talking Serverless IO or Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. And of course, join us next time as we sit down with another fantastic guest.
Yeah.